partially shuts down at the end of the month. In Washington, Jill Nato, Fox News.
President Biden, after his address to the United Nations in New York yesterday, met one-on-one back at the White House with the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson.
Prime Minister Johnson praised the president's commitment made at the UN.
On supporting the world to adapt to climate change, doubling the American commitment that's very important for us.
The UK is hosting a World Climate Conference in Scotland this November, which President Biden pledged to attend.
Fox's Gernal Scott. The president also responding to a lawsuit being settled between the wife of an American diplomat and the family of a British 19-year-old she killed with her car 2 years ago, Harry Dunn.
Based on what I've been told, it was not an intentional act. It was someone who was new to driving on the wrong side of the road, quote unquote.
Our government has refused to send Ann Sekulis back to England for a criminal trial. Body found in Wyoming Sunday is now confirmed by a coroner to be Gabby Petito, a 22-year-old who went missing during a cross-country van trip with her boyfriend Brian Laundrie. He's been missing since last week. The search for him resumes today at a nature reserve in Florida. America's listening to Fox News.
Jason in the House, the Jason Chaffetz podcast. There is always someone doing something stupid somewhere. Dive deeper than the headlines and the party lines as I take on American life, politics, and entertainment. Join me, Jason Chaffetz, every Wednesday as I shed light on the news and make some predictions along the way. You never know who will drop in. Subscribe now on foxnewspodcast.com or wherever you download podcasts.
Connect to Fox News Audio on the Fox News app. Listen to hear your favorite hosts like Brian Kilmeade, Jimmy Fallon, and Guy Benson standing up for what's right, live and via podcast. Just click listen, then swipe right and hear the latest news updates on your time. And scroll down to hear the latest podcasts from Fox News. And it's even easier to listen in the car with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Get programming alerts and notifications. Fox News Audio is on the Fox News app. The voices America trusts. Download it now.
Prosecutors say a man now charged with murdering 4 people in St. Paul, Minnesota, told his father he snapped and shot a couple of people. Their bodies were found in an abandoned car in Wisconsin. Antoine Suggs is in custody in Arizona, waiting to be sent to Minnesota for trial. His father is charged with 4 counts of hiding a corpse. An airport in San Francisco is the first in the country to require coronavirus vaccines for all workers.
That's by order of the city government. Those who qualify for an exemption will be subjected to weekly testing. It applies to roughly 46,000 on-site personnel, including employees of contractors and retail tenants. Some airlines are also requiring their employees to be vaccinated.
Fox's Tom Rigotti. Macy's is holding a national hiring day tomorrow, looking to staff up for the holidays and beyond.
The department store chain is signaling a pre-pandemic level of hiring. It said it plans to recruit 76,000 full and part-time workers for its namesake store, Bloomingdale's and Blue Mercury, as well as call centers and fulfillment and distribution centers. About 48,000 jobs will be seasonal, while the remaining positions will extend beyond that period. Macy's hiring push comes during a major labor crunch that has led retailers to raise wages to attract workers during the critical end-of-year shopping season. Hillary Barsky, Fox News.
The R. Kelly defense team is wrapping up its case at his trial in Brooklyn, New York.
R. Kelly will most likely not take the witness stand at his sex trafficking trial, according to one of his lawyers. The 54-year-old has denied the accusations that he was a sexual predator who used his team of assistants to groom young victims and bring them to Kelly to exploit. His lawyers have portrayed the accusers as groupies seeking to take advantage of his fame. Kelly's accountant, John Holder, was the latest to take the stand for the defense to testify that he never saw him torment his alleged accusers. Holder described seeing Kelly with a backpack full of cash to take the women and girls on shopping sprees.
That's Michelle Polino. I'm Chris Foster, Fox News.
WBEZ is supported by the UChicago Harris School of Public Policy Evening Master's Program. Upcoming application deadline is September 30th for January cohort start. harris.uchicago.edu/evening.
For last year. That's after some local school councils voted this summer to remove one or both officers. This year's contract amount is only $1 million less than last year's, despite the reduction in officers. CPS says last year's amount was reduced because students were removed most of the year, and the police union
discussion at the Southside School, which concluded the Illinois leg of Cardona's return to school tour of the Midwest. Cardona highlighted the need to elevate predominantly black institutions like Chicago State, especially as college enrollment among black males declines.
What we're trying to do across the country is not only reimagine and think about black and brown children have not performed at the same level as others. Historically, we've almost normalized them. We have institutions like this that are doing their job to change that.
CSU President Z. Scott says one key to boosting black student enrollment is to hire more black professors. The White Sox lost to the Tigers 5-3. Their magic number for clinching the division remains at 2. The Cubs lost to the Twins 9-5. Weather today, hazardous waves on Lake Michigan beaches all day and a lakeshore flood advisory. Windy with scattered rain this morning and a high of 67. I'm Mary Dixon, WBEZ News. Traffic, inbound expressways are building. The slowest is the Eisenhower, backed up on the extension at St. Charles, most of the way to downtown. Southbound Route 53 is jammed Rand Road to Northwest Highway. There's a new roadwork project blocking a lane.
WBEZ Traffic is supported by Unbound, helping children and families in need. More at unbound.org.
Up next on Morning Edition, researchers advising the CDC expect the pandemic to improve in the next few months. We'll hear why in just a moment on WBEZ.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include TIAA. When one helps others' futures, their own can take a back seat. TIAA is dedicated to helping people pursue the retirement they deserve. More at TIAA.org/neverrunout.
It's Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Stephen Speaker.
And I'm Rachel Martin. Good morning. We have just moved into autumn, but it's hard not to wonder what this winter in the pandemic will look like. According to a new analysis made available to NPR by a group of researchers advising the CDC, this winter season may not be as bad as a lot of us had feared. NPR health correspondent Rob Stein joins us now. Hi, Rob.
Morning, Rachel.
I mean, this sounds pretty good. Where exactly is this analysis coming from?
So, this comes from the COVID-19 scenario modeling. It combines 9 different mathematical models that project possible scenarios over the next 6 months. And for the first time factors in the impact of vaccinating children ages 5 to 11, which could start as soon as November. I talked about the findings with Justin Lessler at the University of North Carolina, who helps run the hub. He's cautiously optimistic that the worst may really finally be behind us now.
Any of us who've been following this closely, given what happened with Delta, are going to be really cautious about too much optimism. But I do think that the trajectory is towards improvement for most of the country now. And I'm fairly confident that it'll continue to move that way.
In fact, the most likely scenario says that the number of people catching the virus every day would slowly but fairly continuously drop from about 140,000 today to about 9,000 a day by mid-March. The number of people dying from COVID-19 would fall from about 1,500 a day now to far fewer than 100 a day by March. So better than where we were when everyone thought the pandemic was finally starting to be behind us early this summer.
As much as I'd like to just lean totally 100% into this optimism.
Yeah, I know.
It's true, though, that the pandemic has affected different parts of the country in different ways, right? So, are we going to see all this improvement in some places and not in others?
Yeah, Rachel, you're totally right. According to the most likely scenario, the U.S. wouldn't go through another horrible winter surge like last year, but there are several important caveats. This is what the overall national trend would be. The modeling indicates that a lot of variation around the country could occur, with some states continuing to surge for possibly weeks. So things could still get worse in a lot of places before getting better. Lessler is especially worried about Pennsylvania, for example. And hospitals are far from out of the woods yet. And this assumes, for example, that another possibly even more contagious variant doesn't explode. Right. But, given all that, Lessler is still optimistic that the most optimistic scenario is the most likely.
I think a lot of people have been tending to think that with this surge that, okay, this just means it's never going to get better. And so maybe I just need to stop worrying about it and take the risk. But I think these projections show us, and the data shows us, that things are going to be getting better, that there is a light at the end of the tunnel.
All right, so let's talk about how he thinks this.
Yeah.
Why does he think this? Why wouldn't another bad surge happen?
Yes, that's a very good question. You'd think it would surge again given what happened last winter and given the fact that respiratory viruses tend to spread more easily when the weather gets colder and people spend more time indoors. Kids are back in school. But Lessler thinks that at this point there's enough immunity in this country from a combination of enough people getting vaccinated and enough people just having been exposed to the virus at this point.
The biggest driver is immunity. We've seen a lot of Delta. We've seen really big Delta waves. The virus has eaten up the susceptible people, so there are less people out there to infect. That's, of course, also driven by additional people getting vaccinated and other behavior change, from mask wearing to other precautions. But I think the biggest driver is that accumulation of immunity.
But, people have to keep getting vaccinated and taking those precautions to keep the pandemic in check as even more people develop immunity.
Yeah. So do other researchers agree with these findings?
This is a very well-respected group that brings together many of the top disease modelers around the country, but everyone's pretty gun-shy about looking this far down the road, especially given how complicated this pandemic has been and how many curveballs the virus has already thrown at us. Here's Natalie Dean from Emory.
I hope it's true, but I can't shake a little unease I have about what could be coming.
So like the rest of us, Dean is just keeping her fingers crossed.
Right. And just in seconds remaining, Rob, what's the latest on boosters?
Yeah, so a key CDC advisory group is starting a 2-day meeting today about the Pfizer booster to see if they go along with the FDA's recommendation that's expected any time that a Pfizer booster be given to anyone over age 65 and older, or anyone at high risk who got the Pfizer booster 6 months ago. So it's a possibility boosters could start rolling out later this week if things go according to plan.
Okay. NPR health correspondent Rob Stein, thank you.
You bet, Rachel.
When Hurricane Ida struck Louisiana, it was a powerful storm. But was it really necessary that so many people would lose power for so long? Millions of people were in the dark for a week, and 11 died. A joint investigation from NPR News and ProPublica finds the city of New Orleans pushed the local utility for decades to prepare for disasters like this, and Entergy New Orleans resisted. NPR's Tegan Wendland reports.
On a sweltering afternoon a week after Hurricane Ida, Albert Lewis and Tammy Lubbock sit on a neighbor's stoop in New Orleans' 7th Ward.
No power, no gas, no car, nothing. Everywhere I go, I gotta walk and I'll never make it. So hot. Daytime and nighttime.
That's not just an inconvenience, it's dangerous. Lewis can't get his medications. He's sweating so much his colostomy bag needs to be changed often, but he can't get new ones because none of the pharmacies have power. And Lubbock can't check her heart monitor. She passed out in the backyard from the heat.
Well, I was sitting outside in my backyard trying to get cool, and I just fell out. All I remember is him coming and helping me up off the ground.
Her face is all scraped up. They would have evacuated, but like many, they just couldn't afford to. So they hunkered down in their apartment and hoped for the best. It wasn't Ida's wind or rain that proved most deadly. It was being left for days and days without power. No air conditioning, refrigeration, or cell service. Local advocates, regulators, and residents say it didn't have to come to this. Many have been fighting for years to get the local power company, Entergy New Orleans, to better prepare for a storm just like Ida.
It did not surprise me, but it is appalling and it did infuriate me.
Monique Hardin is a lawyer who works at the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice. As storms get more intense, temperatures get more extreme, and sea level rises, she says New Orleans' energy grid isn't ready.
We're surrounded by an entire system that the company Entergy has neglected over the years and can't stand up to the challenges of climate change.
The city council alleged the company slashed spending on equipment upgrades and diverted funds earmarked for basic repairs. Advocates like Hardin have been pushing for years for Entergy New Orleans to better prepare for climate change. Solar and wind power, microgrids that provide backup during emergencies, and burying power lines so the poles don't get knocked over in every storm. Ideas backed by experts. Harding says the company had the perfect opportunity after Hurricane Katrina. But ProPublica and NPR found that Entergy fought those proposals.
They're not governed. They're almost rogue actors.
Former New Orleans Inspector General Ed Quatrevo issued a report on the company in 2015. Oversight of the for-profit monopoly is unusual. It doesn't answer to state utility officials. Instead, it answers to city council members who handle everything from police budgets to trash pickup, as well as power bills. And Quatrevo found in the report that the city council was ill-equipped to regulate Entergy New Orleans.
These companies have, an army of economists and accountants, and you can't match it.
The city council spends millions on outside experts just to regulate Entergy New Orleans. And the council has tried to push back on the company by levying fines, but the company sued. The city and state are trying to cut greenhouse gas emissions, but Entergy has fought those efforts, implying it might sue again. It keeps building natural gas power plants, and its PR firm even hired paid actors to rally support at public meetings. Council President Helena Moreno chairs the Utilities Committee.
There's an expectation that regulators are supposed to do whatever the company wants. And I think that has been the expectation of the company for a while.
Moreno is pushing the council to launch an investigation into Entergy New Orleans to find out what went wrong when Ida hit, why all 8 of its transmission lines failed, and whether the company's doing enough to prevent future catastrophes. Lawyers have now filed a class action lawsuit against the company, calling recent blackouts deadly and avoidable. The company declined to comment.
I don't think a carrot is necessarily working for this corporation. I think, unfortunately, as a regulator, we do have to use stick in this regard.
New Orleanians pay a bigger chunk of their income for electricity than people in other parts of the country, in a city where about twice as many people live in poverty than the national average. Entergy did not agree to an interview. It sent us a statement saying it spent more than $6 billion improving the Louisiana grid and is trying to get federal money to update its system even more. During a recent press call, Entergy CEO Philip May deflected questions about how the company could have prepared for storms like Ida.
Mother Nature is the undisputed world champion, and we can engineer some of the most robust structures, and Mother Nature will simply take those out in storms like this.
But after reviewing articles and public records compiled by NPR and ProPublica, 5 utilities experts agreed the company could have gone further to avoid a disaster like this by, for example, investing more in routine maintenance.
I don't think that New Orleans residents should accept a company not acting in their best interest.
Destiny Knock is a professor of engineering and public policy at Carnegie Mellon. She says Hurricane Ida represents another missed opportunity.
Entergy should have an obligation to make sure that its customers have reliable power throughout the year, throughout disasters.
The company has deployed thousands of linemen who are busy repairing the grid, building it back the way it was. Ultimately, the risk is that next time, people like Lewis and Lubbock will once again be left in the dark. Tegan Wendland, NPR News, New Orleans.
This is NPR News.
This is Chicago's NPR news station, 91.5 WBEZ. 7:19 on this Wednesday, September 22nd. I'm Mary Dixon. The fall equinox occurs this afternoon, and assuming the sun comes out, that means the return of Chicagohenge, the twice-yearly phenomenon when the rising and setting sun lines up directly with Chicago's grid of east and west streets. WBEZ has more exclusive details about the beef between the Chicago Bears and the Park District, which owns Soldier Field. Tony Arnold will have more in the news at 7:30. And later this morning, the Delta surge of the pandemic has slowed the economic recovery and depressed demand for travel in the last few months.
And that showed up in falling hotel rates and airfares and rental car prices.
The Federal Reserve is meeting today and may offer hints on when it might dial back support for the economy. That's coming up in 15 minutes. WBEZ is supported by the British International School of Chicago South Loop. Personalized learning for local and international families, preschool to grade 12. Open house November 10th, BISChicagosL.org.
WBEZ is supported by Synchrony Brain Health. employing alternative neuroscience technologies to facilitate mental health, recovery, and cognitive performance. More at synchronybh.com. Synchrony, science with soul.
More than 18 million Americans are signed up to MLMs, multi-level marketing companies. They sell products through individual distributors and offer anything from life coaching to makeup. It has its boosters and successes, but what of the many claims that MLMs are home to an underworld of predatory tactics where most lose out? That story next time on 1A.
This morning at 10 here on WBEZ Chicago. Support for NPR comes from this station and from Progressive Insurance, where drivers can compare direct rates using Progressive's rate comparison tool at progressive.com or 1-800-PROGRESSIVE. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. From Noom, providing an online evaluation and the tools to help people lead healthier lives through behavior change. More information at Noom, NOOM.com. From T. Rowe Price, offering a strategic investing approach for investors seeking to close the gap between what they've saved for retirement and what they'll need to reach their goals. T. Rowe Price, invest with confidence. And from the listeners who support this NPR station.
It's Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Stephen Ski.
And I'm Rachel Martin. Afghanistan is known as the graveyard of empires for a reason. The Soviet Union spent years trying to impose its political and cultural model on Afghans. So did the British Empire. All of these failed efforts. And now the U.S. joins that list. NPR's Charles Maines talked with Soviet veterans about the parallels they see to the American experience in Afghanistan.
First, the differences. It's February 15, 1989, the final day of the Soviet war in Afghanistan. Camera crews are calmly filming as the last troops prepare to pull out. A band entertains troops and soldiers dust their boots, and then this scene. The last tanks and trucks cross a bridge into neighboring Soviet Uzbekistan, followed by a lone figure on foot, Soviet General Boris Gromov. I can say not one soldier remains behind him, Gromov tells a reporter. The general is then joined by his young son. The two walk arm in arm back into Soviet territory. But it was a telegenic and appropriate ending to a decade of war, says veteran Sergei Opolov. The main thing is that it was organized. From our perspective, evacuation was done just right, says Opolov, who as a captain in division headquarters was among the last troops evacuated. We left infrastructure, but took every tank and machine gun with us, he adds, for reasons he can't understand, the Americans didn't. I met Opolov at the office of the Union of Veterans of Afghanistan in Moscow, where he showed me the uniform he wears for ceremonies and occasional talks at schools about the Soviet effort to prop up a communist government in Kabul and what it meant to serve.
In Moscow, there are people involved in politics who have always understood why we were there and why it was in the interest of the country. But then there's another generation that thinks it didn't matter at all.
Opolov calls his nearly 2 years in Afghanistan the best of his life. Serving in a mountain patrol unit before an injury earned him a desk job. He said he felt like it was the first time he was doing something that really mattered. But Opolov was just one of more than 500,000 Soviet soldiers who cycled through Afghanistan over a decade of fighting. Other people's stories are messier and less happy. 2,300 miles away in Dushanbe, Tajikistan, now an independent country, but back then part of the Soviet Union, I reached Rustam Khajayev. He just turned 18 years old in December 1979 when he was conscripted into the Soviet Army. This was the beginning of the Afghan War. Rustam says Tajiks and other Central Asians were chosen for special Muslim battalions, in theory, so they could at least have some kind of communication with Afghans. But when he arrived, Rustam felt like he'd landed on another planet, a terrifying one. He served in a special ops unit that fought more experienced Mujahideen fighters. We were just kids, and I watched friends die 3 or 4 at a time, province after province, says Rustam. He says each one muttered the same word at the end. Mama. Mama. His wife Mukru Khajaeva, says Rustam, now 59, still has nightmares from those days. He calls out for dead friends in his sleep. telling them to turn back, to run. Meanwhile, she has her own memories from Afghanistan to confront. Muhru served as a translator for Soviet forces in 1987, where she says kind words were her weapon. Muhru worked with Afghan women, at first in Kabul and then other parts of the country. They weren't as conservative as they are now, she says. They would wear hijabs, but when they gathered with us, they dressed openly. Still, she'd find herself omitting phrases or selectively interpreting if comrades said something that might offend the locals. I was raised in the East, and there you learn to tread lightly, she says. But that didn't save her from the war's violence. After viewing soldiers' bodies sheared open from battle wounds, she says she nearly lost her mind. I'd grown up being taught that good always won over evil, she says. Only it turns out evil was always there beside us. We just hadn't noticed. For that reason, Muhru also views the Soviet withdrawal, that day on the bridge, as a happy time. Finally, it meant an end to all the death. No more mothers crying. By the time the Soviet army withdrew, the war was seen by most Soviet citizens as a mistake. 15,000 soldiers had been killed, thousands more wounded, and an estimated million Afghans had died in the fighting. After a decade of war, many Soviets couldn't understand what the USSR was even doing there. But the withdrawal soon became part of a larger story, the end of the Soviet Union itself. When the USSR collapsed in 1991, Rustam says respect for Afghan war veterans went with it. We were 18 when they sent us there, but now the USSR is gone and no one wants to help. They say, why should we? We didn't send you there. But some good things also came out of the war. Rustam and Muhru met at a reunion for Afghan vets, married now for 32 years with children and grandchildren. Rustam is even taking to singing to them about the war and what it means to make it home. Meanwhile, back in Moscow, Opalev, the Russian captain, says the Soviet mission may have been misguided, but the sacrifice and selflessness of the soldiers remains.
If someone thought we came to build socialism, well, yes, that was the political goal at the time, and probably not the right one. Just like the Americans thought, we'll build a democracy. In 5, 10, or 20 years, it didn't work.
Opalev says he's noticed some Russian politicians rejoicing over the American defeat in Afghanistan. As a veteran, Opalev says he just feels for the U.S. troops who serve there. Help one another, he says. Reach out to those who've been injured, to the families of the dead. Muhru says she worries about Afghan women and girls under the Taliban. What do the Taliban think they can accomplish without women? They fight better than the men. And her husband Rustam, still living with his nightmares, he says for those touched by war, it's only the beginning of their struggle. He fears the worst for them and Afghanistan. Charles Maines, NPR News, Moscow.
This is NPR News.
This is Chicago's NPR news station, 91.5 WBEZ. Good morning. I'm Mary Dixon. 7:29 on this Wednesday, September 22nd. Coming up for our final week of StoryCorps in Chicago, we revisit a story from 2015 about a Chicago woman's determination to be a teacher in the face of her parents' concerns. That's coming up at 7:45. Taking a look at traffic, delays each way on and off the Kennedy on the Edens. The inbound Kennedy and Eisenhower are pretty heavy into downtown. On southbound Route 53, new roadwork project jamming things up, Rand Road to Northwest Highway. WBEZ is supported by the Field Museum presenting The Machine Inside, Biomechanics. This exhibit investigates how innovation in nature can inspire advances in engineering. More at fieldmuseum.org. News is next.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Dave Mattingly. Senate Republicans are threatening to block a measure passed by the House that would avert a partial shutdown of the federal government next week. The measure was passed in the House along party lines. It would also suspend the federal debt limit to prevent the government from defaulting on existing obligations. NPR's Giles Snyder says GOP senators are pushing an alternative proposal.
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell and the ranking Republican on the Senate Appropriations Committee, Alabama Senator Richard Shelby, unveiled their alternative shortly after the House passed its bill along party lines. It's similar to the House bill, but it does not include a suspension of the debt ceiling, and that's in line with Republican efforts to make Democrats deal with the government's borrowing authority on their own.
Advisors to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention are meeting today to examine the data surrounding COVID-19 booster shots. Sam Whitehead with member station WABE has more from Atlanta.
The Vaccine Advisory Panel will hear about the immune response to boosters and review early data on the safety of third doses. Their recommendation could alter the Biden administration's plan for people to get booster doses slated to start this week. An advisory panel to the Food and Drug Administration recently set that plan back when it endorsed boosters only for older Americans.
Dow futures are up 200 points this morning. This is NPR News.
55 degrees at 7:31. Good morning. I'm Mary Dixon with WBEZ News. Documents obtained by WBEZ show Chicago Park District Superintendent clashing with the president of the Chicago Bears earlier this year over repairs and improvements at Soldier Field. WBEZ's Tony Arnold reports.
According to the email exchange, Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot hosted the Bears front office in April. Bears president Ted Phillips allegedly asked for reports about the physical condition of the 97-year-old Soldier Field, which is owned by the Park District. Park Superintendent Michael Kelly wrote that the Bears already had the documents and that Phillips had a, quote, propensity for historical misstatements. But Phillips fired back that the reports were incomplete. Shortly after these exchanges, the Bears put in a bid to buy a suburban racetrack, prompting speculation the team may move. Tony Arnold, WBEZ News.
Bennett Academy in suburban Lisle has reversed course and offered a job to a girls lacrosse coach. Administrators at the Catholic school acknowledged they'd withdrawn a head coaching offer to Amanda Cams after learning she was married to a woman. It prompted an outcry by students and alumni. In a statement, Bennett Academy officials now say they determined Cam's background and experience made her the right candidate. She previously coached lacrosse in Pennsylvania, where she led a team to 2 state titles. Police investigating the disappearance of an Illinois State University grad student are asking the public for tips. They've been searching for 25-year-old Jelani Day of Danville for nearly a month. His family and a faculty member reported him missing after he did not show up for class for several days. Bloomington police say they need tips from the public. Day's mother says he wants to become a doctor and was attending ISU to get his master's degree in speech pathology. Weather today, hazardous waves on Lake Michigan beaches, a lakeshore flood advisory this morning, windy with scattered rain this morning, and a high of 67. I'm Mary Dixon, WBEZ News.
On the next Reset, Chicago gospel musician Pastor T.L. Barrett. They'll chat with Sasha Ann Simons about his new music, career, and hopes for the future. That's Reset today at 11 on 91.5 WBEZ.
Hamlin Washington from Snap Judgment. Let's talk about donating your car. Your old or unwanted car, whatever it is, it can be turned into Morning Edition, Wait, or Snap Judgment.
Find out more at wbez.org/car.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Appian. Appian, working to help organizations build processes through a low-code platform to discover, design, and automate. More information is available at appian.com. From Mathnasium, committed to boosting students' confidence, critical thinking, and math grades and scores with in-person or online instruction. Each student follows a customized learning plan. More at mathnasium.com. And from the Lemelson Foundation.
It's Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Rachel Martin.
And I'm Steve Inskeep. The job market is faltering. The pandemic is not. And inflation is higher than it's been in years. So how will the Federal Reserve react as its leaders finish a meeting this afternoon? Now, the central bank is expected to leave interest rates near zero, but we may get some hints about future moves. So NPR's chief economics correspondent Scott Horsley is following along. Scott, good morning.
Good morning, Steve.
Just a reminder, the Fed has 2 missions: promote maximum employment and also keep inflation down, both of which don't seem to be going terribly well right now. So what does the central bank do?
Well, they're acting carefully. We are, as you say, still a long way from full employment, and inflation's running pretty hot. The consumer price index for August was up 5.3% from a year ago, just a tick below the June and July figure. The Fed has argued a lot of these price hikes are temporary, tied to the pandemic, and they think that prices will cool off over time. But you've also got this wild card, which is the Delta variant. As economist Julia Coronado of Macro Policy Perspective says, the spike in coronavirus cases has been pushing prices in both directions at the same time.
On the one hand, we saw it depress demand for travel, and that showed up in falling hotel rates and airfares and rental car prices. At the same time, it is gumming up global supply chains even more.
That's because outbreaks have affected both manufacturing and shipping, and those supply chain bottlenecks are raising prices for things like new cars. So one thing we're going to be watching for this afternoon is whether the Fed adjusts its forecast for inflation up for this year, and if it still expects prices to cool off next year.
I just want to remember the Fed, of course, changes interest rates. It influences interest rates throughout the economy is maybe the best way to put it. It has also shoved trillions of dollars out into the economy with certain effects. How long is that going to continue?
Well, that's what a lot of investors want to know. When the pandemic started, the Fed went to extraordinary lengths to support the U.S. economy, including launching a big bond buying program that's designed to keep long-term interest rates low. At some point, the central bank is expected to scale back those bond purchases, but it wants to be careful not to pull the plug too soon before the economy is strong enough. You know, we had that weak jobs report for August when employers added just 235,000 jobs. Fed policymakers may want to wait to see if hiring picks up in September and October. Kathy Bostancic, who's with Oxford Economics, thinks the Fed also want to wait for Congress to get past this game of chicken like debt ceiling, because that would also grab markets.
I do think that probably gives them a little pause too. Like, let's just move. Make sure we get through that without too much market upheaval. And we think they start to taper, December, early next year.
Investors will also be looking for signals this afternoon about when the Fed might be ready to raise interest rates off in the future. Back in June, policymakers thought it would be 2023 at the earliest, most of them. We'll see if that timeline has moved up at all in the 3 months since.
Is this an especially sensitive time for the Fed Chairman, Jerome Powell?
It is. His term as chair expires in February, so President Biden's in the process of deciding whether to reappoint him for a second term. Powell generally gets high marks for his stewardship during the pandemic, and he would almost certainly win easy Senate confirmation, but he is a Republican, and some progressive Democrats would like to see the president pick somebody else, maybe Lael Brainerd, who currently sits on the Fed's governing board. So just one more thing to ratchet up the pressure on the Fed chairman this afternoon.
NPR's Scott Horsley, thanks.
You're welcome.
It's election time in Japan. The country's set to pick its next leader. One candidate is getting a lot of attention for speaking out in ways Japanese politicians don't often do. Because Japan has been ruled by the same party for the past 7 decades, Taro Kono has to win his way into the system before he can change it. Here's NPR's Anthony Kuhn.
The frontrunner in the polls is Taro Kono, a lawmaker and cabinet minister in charge of Japan's vaccine rollout. He previously served as foreign minister and defense minister. Tokyo-based journalist Hiroshi Izumi explains that Kono was born into a well-known family of Japanese politicians.
Both his grandfather and his father missed being prime minister by 1 step. Becoming prime minister is a wish cherished by 3 generations of the Kono family.
Kono is trying to succeed Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga, who quit after a year in office. Many Japanese feel he botched the government's response to COVID and was a wooden, tone-deaf communicator. Kono, by contrast, is Japan's most followed lawmaker on Twitter. His Japanese and English accounts have more than 2.4 million followers. Ellis Krauss, a Japan expert at the University of California, San Diego, points out that Kono graduated from Georgetown University and he worked for lawmakers on Capitol Hill.
He would, I think, get along great with the U.S., but domestically, the young generation in Japan has really turned off, and Suga did nothing to stop that trend, and they need something to inspire them even a little.
Kono supports same-sex marriage and has said he's open to the possibility of Japan having a female emperor. He's also been highly critical of the country's powerful nuclear energy lobby. I interviewed him shortly after the 2011 meltdown of the Fukushima nuclear plant.
We've been depending on the nuclear energy so much. It's not the policy choice. It's because of those bureaucrats and the power company and the politician got some vested interest in promoting nuclear.
Kono now says that nuclear plants shut down after the meltdown can be restarted so that Japan can go carbon neutral by 2050. Ellis Krauss says that as Kono has risen in the political system, he's had to soften his stance on some issues.
He really is a maverick, and he has been one his whole career. But he's a maverick who's willing to compromise.
But this is not a simple popularity contest. In Japan, the ruling party picks the prime minister. So to win, Kono first has to be elected president of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party, or LDP, which in turn requires the backing of powerful faction bosses and interest groups. Hiroshi Izumi explains.
40% 以上がいわゆる団体職域って言うんですけどね。
More than 40% of LDP members join the party as members of industry associations. They represent interest groups, and the scariest thing for them is Mr. Kono doing whatever he wants.
That's the reformers' dilemma. They need the backing of the same party insiders who feel threatened by them. Then again, Ellis Krauss says, the party bosses need a popular leader who can win elections and keep them in power.
The party will not give mavericks positions of power unless, frankly, they're scared witless. And that is, there is an election coming up for the House of Representatives, and they're going to lose.
And if Kono wins and then tries to break up vested interests, Hiroshi Izumi says, party members could rebel against him. In which case, Kono could find himself the latest in a series of revolving door leaders who, like his predecessor, were forced to quit after one term. Anthony Kuhn, NPR News, Seoul.
It's NPR News.
This is Chicago's NPR news station, 91.5 WBEZ. Good morning, 7:42. I'm Mary Dixon. In just a moment, a Chicago daughter of immigrants talks about her drive to become a teacher. It's our celebration of StoryCorps in Chicago. White Sox lost to the Tigers 5-3, so the magic number is 2 still for the Sox clinching their division. The Sox have lost 5 of their last 7 games. They'll try again this afternoon. Cubs lost to the Twins 9-5 at a breezy Wrigley Field. And the Chicago Sky will host Dallas when the WNBA playoffs begin tomorrow. Phoenix hosts New York. Connecticut and Las Vegas have earned double byes in the playoffs, so they don't begin the postseason play until next week.
You can listen in the car, you can listen from afar, you can listen on your phone, and you can listen while you're home. Take the news with you everywhere by listening to WBEZ on your smartphone or car radio every day.
States count prisoners as they redraw political districts, even if they can't vote from behind bars, what some call prison gerrymandering. This afternoon on All Things Considered from NPR News.
This afternoon from 3 to 7.
Taking a look at traffic now on WBEZ. It's a busy rush to work on the inbound expressways. Northbound Tri-State heavy at 75th, and at Cermak, a stall blocking a lane. Southbound Tri-State backed up to Archer. Northbound 355 is heavy 75th to Maple, and a new roadwork project on southbound Route 53 jamming everyone up from Rand Road to Northwest Highway. WBEZ is supported by the Art Institute, presenting an exhibition of work by Barbara Kruger, a contemporary artist whose images expose the power dynamics of identity, desire, and consumerism. Now open, advance tickets required. And Adler University, educating students to advance socially responsible practices, healthy communities, and a more just society. With degrees in psychology, counseling, public policy, and leadership, adler.edu. Straight ahead, new details on the Justice Department effort to stop American Airlines and JetBlue from joining forces. We'll hear about that, get all the morning's business news in 7 minutes on the Marketplace Morning Report on WBEZ.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from the Kresge Foundation, expanding opportunities in America's cities through grant making and social investing. More at kresge.org. From American Jewish World Service, supporting human rights advocates worldwide as they respond to COVID-19 and defend democratic rights. Learn more at ajws.org. And from the William T. Grant Foundation at wtgrantfoundation.org.
This is 91.5 WBEZ. StoryCorps in Chicago has helped us listen in on some of the most important moments in people's lives. Thousands of Chicagoans have shared their joys, their dreams, and their family memories in conversations recorded at the StoryCorps booth. This week, we're revisiting some of those conversations. Sonia Wang was determined to be a teacher. She wanted to help young people be seen and heard. Her immigrant parents had hoped she'd be a doctor or lawyer instead. In 2015, Wang visited StoryCorps with a young woman she was mentoring. Ji-Yoon No was curious about how Sonia's parents handled her career choice.
How did your family react when they found out that you were going into education?
My parents came from a foreign place. They gave up everything, and they have this American dream that they want for you as their child. And that's to be living in comfort. And to say, hey, I'm also going to be teaching not in the suburbs, right? Not on the north side, but I'm going to be teaching on the south side of Chicago. To them, it was like, why would you, after all the suffering that we've come through, why would we have you suffer more? So after my 4th year of teaching, I transitioned from a school in Inglewood to a school in Woodlawn. In that class, I had 5 girls who read at a 2nd grade level. It really started with one of my students. And she just, we were just reading through a story, and I looked at her and I said, you need to be honest with me. You can't read this. And she looked at me, she said, I can't. So we started meeting every day, and I'm telling my parents about this, and that one girl, and I said, you don't understand. She read this story and she was able to tell me all the story elements, which is so rudimentary, but like for her it was huge, and I was like, can you believe it? And my mom's like, really? And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, oh my gosh, that's awesome. And my dad, typical Korean man, he didn't say too much, but he looked at me and there's that smile. Oh, that I was just like, I need to keep doing this work. And I think they'll come around.
Okay, last question. Imagine you have all the resources in the world to build your ideal school. What would it look like?
The most important thing is to be present and to have my students know that they are seen, that someone sees them. I think just the world could be so different when we see each other, because some of our students go through a whole day feeling like they're invisible.
So I actually resigned at the end of the 2018-2019 school year. At that point, I had been in education for 12 years, and it takes a lot. It takes a toll. There's this voice and kind of, I see you, I see the amazing things you're doing, and I also want you to rest and to play and to have, laughing moments and joy. But that means I need to do that too, right? And me really making sure that can be sustained so that we can continue to work together. And to me, that leads to more joy and a fuller life that we get to live.
That's Sonia Wang. She's now the director of a nonprofit in Bronzeville focused on restorative justice. WBEZ's Bill Healy produced this excerpt. The StoryCorps booth at the Chicago Cultural Center is now closed, but you can continue to preserve stories with your loved ones through the StoryCorps app or StoryCorps Connect. For more information, visit storycorps.org/participate.
I don't know if we'll ever actually come out and admit it, because it wouldn't reflect particularly well on them.
Well, it's sadomasochism, so of course they love it. Hey, we're out of time, but I would recommend to our audience to read your reporting on this, because the saddest thing you found is that students are calling for more of it. They're not fighting the man. They're on the man's side, which is very dispiriting, I have to say, to see.
And also, this has wider implications for the rest of society. It's not just going to stay confined to college campuses.
Right, no. Such a smart point. Thank you for covering this. Michael Tracy, appreciate it. So before the 2016 election, the Hillary Clinton campaign spread several pretty over-the-top lies about the Trump campaign's links to Russia. Now there has been a major criminal indictment that unravels a lot of those lies and exposes them for the rest of us to see. We'll tell you what happened next.
Fox News Digital is the world according to Fox. The top headlines other sites won't touch. No one does it like FoxNews.com. Plus, download the Fox News app to get breaking news, alerts, and all your favorite shows on the go. Fox News Digital, the world according to Fox.
To me, no secret. It's just that you try to live and treat people the way you would like to be treated.
Hi, Bertie. How are you? Hey, Bertie. Bertie Bowman is talking about how he has survived and thrived on Capitol Hill for 3/4 of a century.
He's quite a guy, I'll tell you that. Foreign Relations Committee is the best committee on the Hill.
Bertie, I'm supposed to be the star here. I don't get
Yeah, you the star. You are the star. It's just like a pot of gold to me. I work with good people, and boy, do they treat me nice.
His story starts in 1944, when, as one of 14 children of tenant farmers, he happened to hear South Carolina Senator Burnett Maybank.
I heard the words, if you're ever in Washington, stop by and see me. When he was getting ready to get in his car, the guy was over, I ran and grabbed his coattail and asked him, if I come to Washington, can I stop by and see him? He said, yes, my boy.
How old were you?
I was about 12 and a half, they're 13. I was going on 13.
You took off for Washington at 13?
Yes.
Maybank hired Bowman to sweep the Capitol steps for $2 a week. He worked his way up, meeting the country's most powerful politicians and enjoying an insider view of Congress.
Bertie Bowman, the former clerk of this committee for 500 years.
We know everything that comes in. We know everything that goes out. We know all of the business of every senator and everything.
He was close with titans of the Hill like Jesse Helms and segregationist Strom Thurmond. Here he is bringing in cots when Thurmond filibustered the 1957 Civil Rights Bill for 24 hours straight.
We did a lot of things behind the scene that no one has seen, and they still don't see what senators do and what they don't do and all that stuff, so you keep that to yourself.
By the mid-60s, he was on the Foreign Relations Committee, where he mentored a young man from Arkansas.
Bill Clinton was a messenger. We had fun, man. I used to play like I could play the guitar. Bill Clinton used to blow the satch. We used to do all kinds of things behind that door back there. Push these up a little more.
These days, Bowman prepares the room for committee hearings, checking mics.
Sometimes I would say, swing low.
Escorting witnesses, and keeping time. One Senator Jim Risch starts the hearing. So I know you're the chairman, but who runs the committee?
Oh, he does, clearly. We all take orders from Bertie.
Committee members recently celebrated Bowman after the Senate Federal Credit Union announced it will name its new building after him.
And I said, boy, they're showing me my roses before I drop dead. Everything looked okay.
Bowman turns 89 in April. When are you going to retire?
That's a good question. I've been talking to the good Lord every day. He hadn't said anything about retiring.
Markets around the world are moving higher after Monday's sell-off. It's being attributed to concerns about China's property developer Evergrande and its possible default. Evergrande has investors around the world, including in the United States. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve begins its two-day September meeting today. Investors are going to be paying close attention to Wednesday's decision, which may lay out the path for the central bank to begin tapering its asset purchases. Well, you'll be paying more for shipping next year. FedEx is raising rates on most services by 5.9%. UPS is also expected to raise rates. Both companies have seen demand for their services soar in the pandemic. Owners of the Chevy Bolt are going to be getting a new battery. General Motors says it will start replacing batteries in the electric cars in mid-October. GM has recalled all of the more than 140,000 Bolts because of a fire risk. It is possible some owners will have to wait for months for the fix. And Apple wants your iPhone to detect if you are dealing with depression and cognitive decline. The company now working on detecting sleep patterns, physical activity, and other behaviors. Most of Apple's previous health work has used its smartwatch. Well, for more stories, log on to foxbusiness.com. In New York, I'm Cheryl Casoni.
We open this show with horrifying pictures of what's happened at our southern border, which is completely open, and this country is being invaded. No, that's not an overstatement. More than 1 million people this year expected by the rest of the world. It's been going on for months, and we've asked Texas Governor Greg Abbott many times to come on this show to explain why he hasn't called the National Guard to seal the Texas border and protect the rest of us from this invasion. Greg Abbott has refused to come on repeatedly. So pretty soon, possibly tomorrow, we plan to invite his primary opponents on the show to describe what they would do if they ran Texas. That might be an interesting conversation. We'd like to give Governor Abbott one more chance to come on sincerely. Please, come on and tell us how you plan to save the rest of us from what is happening in your state. Well, it's been more than 2 years since U.S. Attorney John Durham was assigned to investigate the origins of the Russia collusion hoax. His investigation has already gone on longer than the Mueller investigation, and for months it seemed like there was nothing to show for it. Then, Durham charged a Clinton campaign attorney called Michael Sussman for lying to the FBI in 2016 about the Trump campaign's ties to Russia. Sussman was indicted by a federal grand jury. What does this mean exactly? It's more interesting than it sounds. Harmeet Dillon has the details. She's a famous civil rights attorney and a good person. She joins us now to discuss what this is. Harmeet, thanks so much for coming on. So what have we learned from this indictment?
Well, the indictment is a really interesting document, 27 pages long, and as you say, it's the first, major indictment that has been sought by John Durham after 2 years. The core of the allegation is a kind of a flimsy one. It's what they call a process crime, and namely, it's that this Clinton lawyer lied when he went to the FBI general counsel at the time, James Baker, and told him that he had this story about the Trump organization communicating with Russians at a Russian bank, the Alpha Bank, via a sort of secret node on a server, all of which was concocted as a lie. But the lie that he's being indicted for is that he allegedly told the FBI general counsel that he was volunteering this information to the FBI in a big written report as a citizen, not on behalf of any particular campaign or candidate. Now, in real life, his law firm and he specifically worked for the Clinton campaign, the Democratic National Committee. He was partners with Mark Elias, the Democrat super lawyer who's out there suing every state that tries to improve election integrity. So you have to believe in this indictment that the FBI general counsel took on face value that this guy was doing this as a citizen. I think that's a real stretch. So I don't know whether this is going to end up resulting in a conviction or not. The law firm and the lawyer are denying this, and the star witness, James Baker, now works for Twitter, and he is not necessarily cooperating. He's saying he can't remember this exchange exactly. So this is all premised on some notes of another lawyer that James Baker allegedly spoke to. But what's in this indictment is super interesting, and it harkens back to what we know about the Steele dossier and about the pack of lies that the Clinton team told the world, told journalists, told law enforcement about the Steele dossier. They denied they were behind that and all of these allegations about Russia collusion, and in fact they funded it with Fusion GPS. This law firm funded it, and in this case they similarly have denied they had anything to do with this allegation about the Alpha Bank, when in fact this indictment shows like every single time that they had a meeting about this with the FBI, with these tech executives and so forth, they billed for it. So the billing records are actually the paper trail. But you see some remarks in this indictment, and I encourage your viewers to read it, that show that people involved in this conspiracy, and it was a multi-factor conspiracy involving tech executive who wanted to get a job with the Clinton White House, his companies and others, that they were afraid that their bag of dirty tricks was going to come out. And so that's the part that's very interesting.
And the FBI general counsel clearly knew. It is interesting, and you explained it well. Harmeet Dillon, thank you so much. Good to see you.
My pleasure.
New episode of Tucker Carlson today, out tomorrow, 4 p.m. You can stream it on foxnation.com. We're out of time, unfortunately. Back tomorrow night, 8 p.m. The show that's a sworn enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, and group.
The very latest headlines, along with in-depth analysis and conversation, depend on Fox News Radio and foxnewspodcasts.com.
Hundreds are sent back, but thousands may be released. I'm Chris Foster, Fox News. The Biden administration has said that they'd be rounded up and flown home, and some have been, but a lot of the Haitian migrants who've been crowding the Texas border town of Del Rio are reported to have been let go instead.
The AP quotes one official as saying some Haitian migrants in Texas have been released into the U.S. with notices to appear at an immigration office in 60 days. Another said large numbers of Haitians were being processed under immigration laws. That comes despite the Biden administration's claims that they would face immediate expulsion. Homeland Security has been busing some Haitians from Del Rio to El Paso, Laredo, Rio Grande Valley, and Tucson, Arizona, where they're getting processed by the Border Patrol. About 8,600 migrants are believed to still be camped out in Del Rio. Jill Nato, Fox News.
A specific cause of death has not been determined, but a coroner in Wyoming says a body found Sunday is Gabby Petito. She went missing during a cross-country road trip with her boyfriend, Brian Laundrie. There's been a search for him in Florida, centered on a 40-square-mile nature park. The House passes a bill to extend funding of the federal government into December to avoid a partial government shutdown at the end of the month.
On this vote, the yeas are 220 and the nays are 211. With 0 answering present, the bill is passed.
That's every Democrat voting yes, every Republican voting no, because the bill would also extend the nation's debt limit until December 2022. That has no hope, really, of having enough Republican support to pass in the Senate. The U.S. could default on debt if the limit isn't extended or suspended in the next few weeks. Former President Trump is suing the New York Times, 3 of its reporters, and his niece over a 2018 article about his private tax files. The suit calls for no less than $100 million in damages from the Times and from Mary Trump. America's listening to Fox News.
Connect to Fox News Audio on the Fox News app. Listen to hear your favorite hosts like Brian Kilmeade, Jimmy Fallon, and Guy Benson standing up for what's right, live and via podcast. Just click listen, then swipe right and hear the latest news updates on your time. And scroll down to hear the latest podcasts from Fox News. And it's even easier to listen in the car with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Get programming alerts and notifications. Fox News Audio is on the Fox News app. The voices America trusts. Download it now. From the Fox News Podcasts Network.
I'm Ben Domenech, publisher of The Federalist, and I'm inviting you to join a new conversation with the smartest thinkers out there about the country and where we're going. It's the Ben Domenech Podcast. You can subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, FoxNewsPodcast.com, or wherever you download your podcasts. This new show will feature deep dive interviews with newsmakers and some of your favorite Fox News analysts. I hope you'll join me. Subscribe to the Ben Domenech Podcast.
Subscribe and listen now by going to FoxNewsPodcasts.com.
Centers for Disease Control advisors are scheduled to meet today to discuss who should get coronavirus booster shots and when.
An FDA advisory panel met last week recommending Pfizer's third vaccine dose for people 65 and older or those who are considered high risk, though the panel overwhelmingly rejected booster shots for the general public, pushing back on the Biden administration's plans to begin releasing the shots this week. Like the FDA, the CDC meeting only advisory, with the final decision resting with the agencies themselves.
Fox's Jeff Manasso. In Germany, a dispute over face masks for coronavirus protection gets a gas station clerk killed.
German police say a 20-year-old working at a gas station has been killed after he asked a customer to wear a face mask in line with coronavirus restrictions. Police say the customer left the gas station, then returned with a gun and shot the clerk in the head. A 49-year-old man has been arrested. Prosecutors say he told investigators he was angry at being denied service and rejects COVID-19 control measures. Simon Owen, Fox News.
A look at the weather forecast around the U.S. on this first day of fall.
A strong cold front sweeping across the eastern third of the country will bring isolated storms and flooding over the next few days. Much cooler temperatures are moving in behind the front. Gusty winds bringing the elevated threat of wildfires to portions of the Sierra and the northern Rockies. What's left of Tropical Depression Peter is passing north of the Leeward Islands and Puerto Rico over the next day or so. Locally heavy rainfall and isolated flooding will be possible. Rose is also weakening and won't affect anyone. Another disturbance off the coast of Africa will likely become a tropical depression by Thursday or Friday.
Fox meteorologist Janice Dean. The actor Willie Garson died, 57 years old. He played the main character's friend Stanford on Sex and the City.
Every gay guy I know is running off to Hawaii, putting on a caftan, reciting vows, and feeling superior to me.
His son announcing the death on social media, not mentioning a cause. I'm Chris Foster, Fox News.
This is Fox News Talk.
Headline Rewind.
1970.
The student now goes to college to proclaim rather than to learn. The lessons of the past are ignored and obliterated in a contemporary antagonism known as the generation gap.
You just go through a phase of wanting to be up there, in the limelight. Well, I'm going through a phase now where I don't want to be in the limelight.
Ding! A
Ali comes out to meet Frazier, but Frazier starts to retreat. If Frazier goes back an inch farther, he'll wind up in a ringside seat. Ali swings to the left, Ali swings to the right. Look at the kids carry the fight.
Everybody just gathered around, organized, and it was orderly. No kids were out of hand. They just wanted to talk. Two started throwing tear gas, and the kids were picking up and throwing them back at the cops. And they chased the kids over the hill. The cops were boxing, and there was kids all around them. And all of a sudden, cops got trigger happy and shot kids.
News as it happened, news as it happens.
This is Fox News Talk.